All right, so let's go ahead and create our first agent from A to Z. It's going to be a simple setup, but we will pick up some very important concepts that we will be using throughout the rest of the course and that you will most likely be using after you finish the course in your own efforts. What you see here is on the left, we have our Flowise instance. It is the blank instance that we just deployed. As you can see, everything is clean here. And we don't have any chat flows yet. Flowise refers to an individual project that contains all the different nodes as a chat flow. Okay, before we do the credential on the right, let's do the credential first. A cool little tip, we use a platform called Doppler, which is really awesome. It's very simple. It's not a complicated product, but it is essential. This is where you can store your keys. It's at doppler.com. You'll find the link in the resources. And it's very for you to kind of maintain separate environments, have as many keys as you want. They even have auto rotation features, pretty deeply integrated infrastructure specifically for environment variable management. So I strongly suggest that you use something like this or an alternative platform. But I used to keep things just in kind of a Notion, big files, tables, and that's not very secure. That's not very safe. There's a lot more manual work that goes into it. So feel free to use your platforms like this. Okay, so in order to get started with our first agent building experience, we're going to need our OpenAI key. I won't go into too much detail here because I think at this point, probably all of you know how to get an OpenAI key. You go to their website, sign up, grab a key, and you're ready to go. So what I'll do now is open up side by side. What you're seeing is the same instance in two different browser windows. We're looking at the same deployment that we pushed to Railway earlier. To create this credential, filter down to what we want, OpenAI API key, call it whatever you want. This is going to be Langmaster's temp API key. Another tip, you can name these keys whatever you want, but it is the professional programming standard. Whenever you see env files in any repo, or at least in the TypeScript and JavaScript world, you will see that they follow the underscore in all caps convention. And then we're going to paste our key here. Your value, of course, will be different and we don't get to see it. So Flowise takes care of the safety aspect for us. We will go ahead and add it and boom, that's it. So now this becomes an evergreen entity throughout our instance and we can use it in any of our flows. Okay, so let's go to chat flows and open up, and instead of starting with a template, which of course we can, and I absolutely urge you to explore as much as you can with these different templates, we'll start with a clean blank slate. In a nutshell, as you can see, this is really no different than the canvas surface you see in Miro or Figma or similar platforms. It is based on React Flow. It's a very excellent library that allows you to build just about any kind of GUI for these types of canvases. So first thing that you always want to do when you're building these chat flows, whether in Flowise or Langflow, is you're going to want to save, and you're going to want to do this a lot. There is no autosave feature, and there are reasons for that. As you make changes and add nodes, it's hard to do this in an auto mode. So I understand why both Langflow and Flowise want you to frequently save, rather than rely on this auto save functionality that we are used to in maybe other platforms like Google Sheets or Google Docs. So we will go ahead and name this Langmaster's prompt creation agent. You've probably heard the term prompt engineering. It's quite a big topic now in the world of AI, because if you don't prompt engineer your agents, or even if you don't customize your OpenAI assistant or your ChatGPT, you will most likely get more generic results, and you will lose that ability to program a custom identity into each one of your agents. A big part of my belief and this course in general is that the future next year and 2025 for the world of AI, we're going to shift more and more from generative AI and into the territory of context-aware cognitive AI, where we'll have to do less prompt engineering and less manual work. And instead, these agents will become more self-aware and just smarter and better. At least that's the hope. So we'll go ahead and save this. And as soon as that happens, let's actually say prototype. So you're more than welcome to use whatever naming convention you want. If you're working for an organization and you're in a team, you might decide to do something completely different. Use underscores, use all caps, use lowercase. It does not matter. This title can be anything as long as you know how to, navigate through them. My personal preference is to specify which stage this agent is in, because what you'll do sometimes is build the prototype and decide that you don't want to mess with this kind of node arrangement. Instead, you'll want to copy and duplicate this, which you can do here. So we can either duplicate the chat flow, load it, export it, analyze it, or delete it. If you want to duplicate it, and then the next build will be something you name like a production build. First, you will click on this plus, and this will display the core ground for where we will be working in both Flowise and LangFlow. They do look quite similar in both platforms, but each one has different modules, different tools. LangFlow has a bit more, just I guess because of their more direct connection to langchain. But still, I find Flowise to be more than sufficient in basic, intermediate, and advanced agent creation. Let's start with a conversation chain. So you grab it, drag it, and boom, it appears here. You can look at it in this large format, but I prefer to zoom out quite a bit, which you can do here. Zoom out as much as you need. The more complex our chains will become throughout the course, and the more complex that your own chains will be, you definitely are going to want to zoom out. Let's quickly zoom back in to look at the anatomy of what this is, what we're looking at here. So essentially, a conversation chain is a module that allows for inputs, such as we can hook up a language model, which is a base chat model here. It even has these tips for you as to what you can connect to these dots. We can hook up a memory module, and we could then hook up document loaders, document modules. And then from there, as you can see at the end of this tip, it says runnable. So we don't need to do anything in this output. All we have to worry about is connecting our stuff to the inputs. We have our conversational chain, which has these inputs, and then the additional parameters section. And you're probably already aware of what system messaging is, and reinforcement messaging perhaps. On different companies like Cohere calls it different things. Anthropic has their own term. So system message essentially is this identity programming aspect. So I guess before we hook up the rest of our nodes, why don't we start there? What we'll do is back up. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, we're going to go to this platform. So this is PromptBase.com. I'm sure there are other sites that do this kind of thing, But I've found PromptBase to be really great. Essentially, they have a very big, thriving community of creators. I call this a prompt bank, a prompt locker. You can go to their homepage and search for any kind of prompt. It's a prompt marketplace. As you can see, they offer prompts for many different models. So you really can get lost in a rabbit hole here, just exploring everything. Look at this. We can draw famous people in a kawaii style, and all you have to do is pay $2.99 to get this prompt, and then it will tell you what you need to program so that you can then get a cute looking Elon Musk holding a bunny or a Cristiano Ronaldo here. Yeah, so this is really cool. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my section, which is under purchases. As you could see, I have a couple of them, or a bunch of them. What we're going to be looking at is this prompt generator. This is essentially an engineering paragraph that will act as a generational source for the different types of agents we want to create. It's usually helpful to start with your vision for what kind of identity and constraints and limitations you want your agent to have. So you definitely will want to use something like this. It doesn't have to be exact, but it will allow you to build better experiences. So what I'll do here is grab this template. You want to work fast and efficiently. I found it to be quite unnecessary to, spend a ton of time and try to generate a lot of stuff when you can instead go to a source that has validated certain things for you and start from there. I've had really great results with this specific template. So when we get into we have our prompt now. Now you know that it's promptbase.com. This is where it comes from. And there's tons of other variations from different creators of these prompts. So grab whatever one you want, go into additional parameters, expand the window, and let's dump it here. Immediately, let's do a little bit of rewriting, right? Because we're not just going to be working strictly with OpenAI's ChatGPT. This course focuses on large language models as a whole. We will be interacting with Claude from Anthropic, Cohere's models, AI 21 Labs, Stability, obviously, for stable diffusion, Meta's music gen. It's not really just ChatGPT. You can then say large language models. Let's go through it really quick. This is a direction, the deterministic prompt engineering approach that we as humans are using to dictate what we want these generative technologies to do. I will state what I want, and you will engineer a prompt that will yield the best and most desirable response from large language models. Each prompt should invoke asking, let's just say ChatGPT here, fine, to act as role. And we're using these square brackets here and to basically add some dynamic elements. So for example, act as a lawyer. And you've probably also heard earlier this year when ChatGPT was just sort of coming about, there was this thing called Dan mode, which essentially allowed you to unlock the model and speak with it on a different level than you would from a gated OpenAI approach. But that's been shut down. It's not really necessary. We do still heavily rely on these act as directives. The prompt should be detailed and comprehensive, and it should build on what I request to generate the best possible response. A large language model must consider and apply what makes a good prompt that generates good contextual responses. Don't just repeat what I request, improve and build upon my request so the final prompt will yield the best and most useful and favorable responses out of large language models. And we're going to place any variables in square brackets. I'm going to actually type in our prompt, our direction for this agent to create an identity. Since we're going to be working with a generative audio project later in the course, here's what I wrote up, and I will just go ahead and paste it here just to save time. And let's not double up here, it's not to create confusion. Okay, so create a prompt for an act as role of a music production assistant. I want to be able to talk to the agent and get advice and help on prompting generative audio models to produce high quality music snippets, compositions, and other related topics. The agent should be knowledgeable in music theory and be well versed in modern production standards. Important note here, this could be anything. If you're working in programming and need to build customized, your own buddy that will help you, troubleshoot your GitHub repos and what have you, essentially modify this and insert your own variables. So it doesn't have to be music production assistant. It could be just a general assistant. It could be a personal assistant. There's no, direct rules. The length is also arbitrary. You can do whatever. You can be more specific. You could almost be less specific. But I find that providing this kind of base context is quite helpful. So we're going to save. And now, essentially what we've done is given the basic directive to this conversational chain so that it has an identity. We're going to go ahead and save. As you can see here, we got a toast that says chat flow saved, which is very nice. So from here, this chain is absolutely useless. It has no brain, no engine, no memory, and no place to load information. So what do we do next? Let's start with the engine. I call it engine because that's essentially what runs that whole car analogy. The chat models, or the predecessors of the chat models, were the instruct models and command models, where they sort of, for ChatGPT's technology has been around for many years, and there were companies since 2014, 2013 already allowing people to ask an LLM to write an article for you. We will go ahead and grab the chat model from OpenAI to keep things simple. But as you can see, we do have quite a bit of choice. If you have keys and access to Azure's chat OpenAI, then put in your keys and use this. I'm a big proponent and user of AWS Bedrock. They essentially are now in direct competition with OpenAI and really gunning for kind of being that, top provider of different models. So they have a whole bunch of models instead of just one. And then there's a bunch of other ones. So feel free to use whatever one. But I think for us to get started, especially if you're not super familiar with all of this, let's just go with Chat OpenAI. Okay? You're more than welcome to structure these things however you want. You can zoom out into oblivion. You can zoom in and be, really close. This is partially why this is so cool. Depending on your workflow preferences, you can style it to be that way. So we'll start with connecting the credential. And as you can see, since we've inserted it into our credentials module, it is now available to us to use across all Chat OpenAI, instruct OpenAI models, and even the embeddings models, which we will look at later in the course. So very simple, connect your key, right? Select your model. You certainly can work with 3.5 Turbo. It is cheaper, it is faster, it is really good. But honestly, GPT-4 base is just solid. It just has this advantage, I think, I've probably, I don't know, I don't want to say how many tokens I've spoken to it over this year, but at least, goodness, I don't know, a couple million or something. So I've had a lot of time to test 4 against 3.5, and yeah, 4 is really good. Temperature, if you're not already familiar with this is quite an important parameter. If we set temperature to 0.1, it will be very deterministic, kind of almost like sterile, and I don't want to say boring, but it's going to really stick to the script. It won't be that cognitively influenced or driven, and it's really just going to be trying to return to you exactly what you ask. And if we go to the other end of the spectrum and do 0.9, here we're going to remove a lot of that deterministic functionality and allow it to be a lot more creative, pull from a wider net of information, I guess. And if you have, once we connect some browser elements and vector store loaders and other stuff, you will notice that with higher temperatures, it has a lot more flair and personality. And then we also have access to other fundamental parameters and variables that we can work with that are very standard to OpenAI. So if you've worked with OpenAI's API before, this is super familiar and quite similar across all of the models. So you can specify how many tokens you want to limit it at and select different parameters. Believe it or not, for this workflow, we don't need to select any of this since we're allowing chat to handle most of it. Let's go ahead and create our first connection. So what I'm going to do is let's zoom in a little bit just so you could see and perhaps drag this closer. So the way this works, what I truly love about it and why I'm so enthusiastic about this approach is it's just so intuitive. You hover over the little blue dot, which is the output point, and then you connect that to the input point of your chain. That's it. This is now a functional chain. We're not going to prototype it just yet. You see the little asterisk, the red one. It means that it will not run if it does not have a memory store, and it will give us an error. The entire course will basically be us connecting these different nodes. This is a node. Most of them will have different parameters and variables that we can set. The whole magic of this business is being able to connect the right nodes to the right agents and having the tenacity and the patience to prototype and fail, because easy chains are easy, but once you start connecting something upwards of 10 to 15 or more modules and really trying to work with multiple data stores, having something like AWS DynamoDB powering the entire chat conversation, can get a lot more errors that way. We'll start simple so we can build on top of our foundation. From here, I am going to grab one of the first, let's go ahead and save, a very basic memory store. So if we go into this section, here's what Flowise currently offers. And again, this is constantly growing. You can see that there's quite a few options. And if you are already familiar with AWS, DynamoDB is something that I use internally. It's great. It's just simple, powerful, easy to set up, and we will go through that later in the course. There's also options from Motorhead, Upstash, Zep, Redis and Zep you can deploy yourself, and Motorhead as well. I'm running all three on Railway. You can then use them as your kind of own solution and not rely on cloud hosted offering that you have to pay a monthly SaaS fee or whatever. So before we get into these slightly more complex options, because these do require keys, they do require setup in each and individual one of the platforms, whether you have it self-hosted or if you are running it through the standard cloud-based offerings. All three of these, Zep, Redis, and Motorhead, offer self-hostable options. Upstash, I believe, is cloud only. What we will work with initially are these top three. These are different from externally hosted services in the sense that they are langchain native modules. They don't require an external setup. You can work directly with something like this. And essentially what we're doing here is recreating ChatGPT, only our own version. If we then swap out the LLM to be something completely different, like Anthropic's Claude or Cohere's Command, then yeah, then all of a sudden we don't have a chat GPT. We have a different brain, but a similar flow or similar structure. I will go ahead and grab this one. Buffer memory essentially just remembers previous conversational back and forth directly. That's it. It's as simple as it gets. We simply need to grab it, drag the node from the output here to the input here. Boom, we don't get an error. A quick tip, if you try to connect a module that is not an acceptable input, it simply won't let you do it. And I'm gonna kill this connection, and then I'm gonna try to do this thing. Look at that. It just stops me, it blocks me. Why isn't it up? Nope, can't do, because cache cannot connect to a memory input, right? So anytime you run into something like that, just know you're probably trying to insert the wrong module into the wrong input. So delete that, reconnect this, and yeah, so now we do have a functional basic MVP. We can save, and we will preview it in a second. One other thing that will connect, but in a dummy fashion for now, to keep things straightforward at first, what you see here is this third input that allows you to do a document loader. It says here, it's a very helpful, cool tip. It says, include whole document into the context window. If you get a maximum context length error, then swap out your model to something like Claude or GPT-4 32K. And again, these both are still gated, and it's a little bit more difficult to access. I have Claude 100K, but not GPT-4 32K. So I use the GPT-4 base. Claude is very powerful. Since we are creating a prompt making agent, you can go into the document loader section, and here you see all the different options. This is one of the more magical parts. You can connect a ton of different sources. You can grab an API spec and load it from there. You can connect your entire Airtable or the Airtable data bases of your clients. You can patch things in from Confluence. You can scrape the web with a Cheerio web scraper, even Figma. So fold entire folders, GitHub loader, you name it, and this is constantly growing. This is where that, experiential part is very important, because yeah, it's impossible to cover every single one in a course. I'll do a lot of them on my YouTube channels. We will be looking at things in more detail, but for now, just know that the document loaders are really powerful. You can go into S3 buckets. This company called Unstructured can ingest massive amounts of data and help you make sense of it. To get started, let's say you have a CSV file, something as simple as the standard CSV file. Maybe that has a bunch of prompts, and we want the agent to be able to reference all of them. Let's say you go to PromptBase and you load up on a whole bunch of them, like $2.99 here, $3 here. Like all of these are no more than $6. Most of them are about $2 to $3. So you only would need, like 3 or 4, or maybe 10 at max, when you know what you want to do. So in this case, we can then connect this document to this module. Again, you see the connection is made. Here's another cool thing. Most document loaders do require a text splitters / ingestion formatters. So you would go into the text splitter section, and as you can see here, yeah, tons of different options where we can split things by character with a new line formatting, which a lot of models require. We'll look at that later in the course. We can split code, markdown, do things recursively. This is actually pretty cool. This is the one I use a lot, so you'll probably want to grab that. You'll notice that the further you zoom out, the harder it becomes to zero in on the dot to get the connection. So you'll be going back and forth, zooming in, zooming out. So connect the splitter. Chunk sizes, it varies, but usually anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 is good. And then chunk overlap could be like anywhere from 50 to 100. So maybe like 75. Yeah. So again, there's additional parameters here. You can specify these reject styled patterns and get really fancy with it. But for now, I'm just going to connect this up. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and test this out and see if what we did here is actually going to work. We have our identity programmed. We've saved compulsively, which I strongly urge you to get in the habit of. Just save. And then let's go ahead and preview it. So what I like to do when I build these things is first, I actually like to ask it, please, you don't have to be a nice person, and I don't think the model cares about these human words, but we're humanizing a lot of this AI tech, so I prefer to be nice to it. Please state your core purpose and what you specialize in. Okay, so we're gonna click send, and all right. So we have an incorrect key. Okay, so we did have a little hiccup with the key there. Apparently I fat fingered a wrong value. So it told us, hey, get the right key, otherwise we won't let you in. Okay, so fix that. If you ever get that kind of error message, Flowise is pretty awesome about that. It'll just tell you straight up in the chat window what's happening. So here's where we are, and here's what we've done. We've used the chain. By the way, sometimes you'll hear me use the terms chain and agent and retrievers sort of interchangeably, but fundamentally they are different. They do serve different purposes. They have different capabilities within the world of langchain at large. I'll cover exactly what the differences are in future videos. So we've built a chain and we've connected a brain to it, which is in our case essentially ChatGPT. Then we've connected a base buffer memory, which is what ChatGPT uses, although they have become a lot more sophisticated and now use more than just a simple buffer memory. I think that's what it started as late last year and earlier this year, but it's really come along at this point. We're just using a simple buffer memory. And then we've added this simple document loader, although we're not using it in this specific module just yet. So as you can see, I've started the conversation. Now what you see on the right here is our interface for doing all sorts of testing. We build on the canvas and we come in here and start figuring out, okay, is this working? The easy ones that are simple, and then the more complex chains, you know, you can ask very specific questions like retrieve this specific data from that vector store. If it's a Zapier connection, like send an email, that will require configuring your Zapier NLA account. So it gets pretty complex if you want to. But here we simply asked it, state your purpose and your core identity. It still kind of told me this part, which is not great. I don't really want it to be telling me that it's this AI developed by OpenAI at all, but we can work on that later. So I'm acting as a music production assistant skilled in contemporary music production, methods and theory. Remember, this is coming from our prompt programming here. Whatever you add here, and this is probably where you'll spend a lot of time as you build these things, in order to achieve high quality results, right? You're going to need to play around with different parameters here. It's kind of more of an art than a science right now. Yeah, so you can always then come back to the chain, expand it. And yeah, so I'm just having a basic conversation with it. So you're my new music making buddy, and it's quite excited too. Now it's working within the context that we've provided. So the very first task I've asked it to do is to generate a prompt that can be used with a generative AI music model to produce contemporary pop tracks, something pretty simple. And here is what we get. We will basically look at this in more detail later, but there is quite a bit of, you can see how detailed it is, right? The track should be instrumental, but should leave room for potential vocals. Think like artists, and here's our custom variable type insertion. So we could say Calvin Harris or Drake or Taylor Swift, whoever you want, right? And then We can now use this prompt inside of something like Meta's Music Gen and a couple of other models, which we'll look at in the replicate section. So let's see. Now let's ask it something a little bit more specific. So I'll say, I want to write a modern pop song, but my background is actually in hip hop. What are the most common patterns and things that I should study up on if I want to cross over into being a pop music producer, right? As you can see, we have streaming functionality. It's very ChatGPT inspired. We do have markdown structure, so you can see how it's giving us things in a bullet list, and it's even doing bold text for certain things. So it's pretty powerful and advanced here, okay? We're not just, once you see in the export lesson how we're going to interface this with different external platforms and bring it out via API or the included embed codes that consist of both React and HTML code, we can just grab and drop anywhere we want, and we will essentially get this interface. If we do the API only, we can customize how it looks and even the formatting of the different results that come out. It gave us this response. Honestly, it's a bit generic, and I guess it's because the question was kind of generic. So that's another thing that you'll learn, or maybe already know. If you want specific high quality answers, you should be targeted in your questions. If you ask generic stuff, especially with basic setups, or even if you go to ChatGPT itself, or even on Cohere's playground, although Cohere has actually been coming up and being really, really smart, and Falcon is something else entirely, which we'll look at later. You want to structure your questions and direct your conversations to be more specific. Now you have a good idea of how to build a very simple yet powerful chain. We'll look at the agent in the next lesson, what an agent can do and how it differs from a chain. Make sure you save and always get this little green toast. That way you don't lose any progress. Then, you see how like the minute you make a change, you get the little red asterisk and you gotta save. Back out, and there we have it. See you in the next one.